Stellenbosch University's Biomedical Research Institute is a world-class, future-focused research complex which is dedicated to understanding the genetic and biomolecular basis of diseases emanating from South Africa and the rest of Africa in the fields of bioinformatics, genomics, anatomy, neurobiology, advanced surgical sciences, biobanking, and more.
The realization of the Biomedical Research Institute resonates with Stellenbosch University's vision of being Africa's leading research-intensive university, with the objective of being globally recognized for our excellence in innovation as we advance knowledge in service of society.
The BMRI is home to the university's Department of Biomedical Sciences, which is made up of over 500 researchers.
At the heart of our scientific endeavours is the challenge to be locally relevant and globally competitive. The appropriate infrastructure to support our researchers and partnering universities and agencies is necessary. Today we are glad to have to launch the BMRI.
Stellenbosch University's Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences academic offerings include 6 undergraduate and nearly 90 postgraduate programs and a host of diploma and short courses across a range of subjects. The faculty is also home to 92 National Research Foundation rated researchers and 7 South African Research Chair Initiative research chairs.
The Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences at Stellenbosch University is situated in Cape Town, South Africa. It's also one of the areas with the highest incidences of not only infectious diseases such as HIV and tuberculosis, but also alarmingly rising levels of non-communicable disease. These major colliding and interacting epidemics put our health systems under severe strain and adversely affect the quality of life. As one of the top faculties for medicine and health sciences on the African continent, we play a key role in providing solutions to these problems through our biomedical research, amongst others.
The BMRI hosts several research groups and centres, including the Rare Disease Genomics Group, TB Host Genetics Groups, the Centre for Cardiometabolic Research in Africa, and the Centre for Epidemic Response and Innovation. This centre is a partner member of the South African mRNA Vaccine Consortium, selected by the World Health Organization to become the first COVID mRNA vaccine technology transfer hub in the world. The 1.2 billion rand investment in the BMRI will allow for the immediate expansion of Stellenbosch University's current research activities, as well as strengthen its existing research and teaching capacity. The BMRI hosts a state-of-the-art, fully automated biorepository, the first of its kind in the Southern Hemisphere, which stores between 3 and 5 million samples at -80 degrees Celsius. The BMRI is also home to a bioinformatics hub, electron microscopy laboratories, proteomics and fax laboratories, a morphology museum, the SunSkill laboratory, a clinical research unit and conference facilities. This facility is one of the country's greenest buildings to have been completed over the past 2 years. The BMRI's energy and water systems all contribute to the university's efforts to meet net zero targets.
The investment in the BMRI will allow significant human capacity development through training of some of the best students from the continent. The BMRI, along with our faculty's large network of collaborators, will be a game changer using breakthrough science to save lives.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight at the Breaking Boundaries at the BMRI. This is the first event that we are running today, the second event officially, in the launch of this new magnificent building that we are standing in. So for tonight, we are here to have some great conversation with some great speakers today or tonight. And I really do encourage you to have conversations with people that you might not ordinarily speak to or that you might not know, because we've got a very diverse population of people, if I can use the word, in the room. And never mind the speakers tonight. Just some housekeeping rules as we usually have to do. Bathrooms are always an important one. So if you go straight out the door, on your right, you will see the bathrooms. There is Wi-Fi available. The Wi-Fi is the BMRI launch if you want to connect. And the code is pretty easy. It's BMRI launch 2023. Very excited, exclamation mark. So quite easy. If you need some more of that, I can help you with that Wi-Fi code. We are currently in load shedding. So at 8 o'clock, the power will come back on. If there is a slight technical glitch, please do excuse that. We all know why, unfortunately. We still live in that country. And then on the last note, and probably the most important part, I'd like to just formally welcome some people that are joining us tonight. So firstly, the Dean's Management Team and Prof. Elmi, welcome, and also thank you for speaking tonight. Then any Stellenbosch University staff, thank you for joining from Stellenbosch campus. I know Prof. Flavia went all the way to Belleville campus tonight to go see if there was anyone there, so welcome to all staff. Alumni, I know we've got lots of alumni in the room, so thank you for joining as well, and we hope that you find value in these conversations tonight. And then anyone here that just wants to have a good conversation tonight, that you just said, like, hey, here's a ticket, let's go to Stellenbosch University Tygerberg campus. Thanks so much. So what we're going to do first is our first speaker is coming through a video through us. He's on the screen at the moment, and we invited him to attend all the way from the Novo Nordisk Foundation. Unfortunately, he couldn't join us, but he was so kind enough to send us a video. His name is Martin, and this surname is Norwegian, and I don't speak Norwegian, so I'm going to mess it up, so I do apologize for that. So it's Martin Ridderstall. So got so many zeros on top of the A, it's weird. Anyway, he's the Senior Vice President and Chief Medical Officer at the Novo Nordisk Foundation. He's the head of science. Martin is an MD, specialist in endocrinology and internal medicine. He has a PhD in molecular signaling and an MBA from the Copenhagen Business School. He was the professor of endocrinology at Lund University with a research interest in genetic background and clinical care of obesity and type 2 diabetes. He has also been instrumental in establishing the Rashid Center for Diabetes Research in the UAE. Before joining the Novo Nordisk Foundation, he was working as the corporate vice president of clinical pharmacology and translational medicine at the Novo Nordisk company. So please sit back as we watch this first presentation by Martin. Thank you so much.
Through my career, I've moved from molecule to mouse, from mouse to man, from man to management, and management to market, to where I am today, heading medical science in the Novo Nordisk Foundation. So, basically, I know very little, but about a lot. I thought I'd use that perspective and share some observations and ideas with you. Central to what we do here at the Foundation is to try to prevent, understand, and manage cardiometabolic disease, so primarily obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. These are the most common and most deadly diseases of our day. For example, a staggering 1 billion people, adults, adolescents, and children, are living with obesity today. 1 billion and counting. More than 500 million adults are living with diabetes, often with both obesity and diabetes and cardiovascular disease, which is now the #1 cause of death, with recent statistics suggesting 18.6 million deaths per year, 75% of which occur in low and middle income countries. Of particular concern is the fact that many populations don't even have access to diagnostics for these diseases. This is the first point I want to make. There is a global need to democratize the access to diagnosis of cardiometabolic disease, and henceforth, of course, to treatment and monitoring of disease. But let me come back to that. An additional problem of diagnosis is that the way in which we diagnose cardiometabolic disease is often very crude or simplistic. Since there is lack of mechanistic understanding of disease, the diagnosis is often based on symptoms and signs, such as, for instance, increased blood sugar, leading to a diagnosis of diabetes, implying that there is only one cause for increased blood sugar, only one diagnosis, and only one treatment. The equivalent would be to treat every headache as a brain tumor. For obesity, we're talking about underweight, normal weight, overweight, obesity, and severe obesity, as were it a matter of body mass itself, rather than, for instance, the location of fat or of its consequences and complications. Attempts to subgroup classically diagnosed diseases have been made, of course, but these are still very crude. For diabetes, the division in type 1 and type 2 is well known. Type 1 implies complete lack of insulin production based on an autoimmune self-destruction of the cells in the pancreas that produce insulin, and a more or less absolute requirement for insulin treatment. But what of type 2 diabetes then? Well, type 2 diabetes is everything else. This is the second point I want to make. There is a need to reclassify or subgroup disease such that the diagnosis makes sense from the point of view of informing on, predicting the most suitable treatment and risk for future consequences and complications, the prognosis, so that preventive action can be taken. Such reclassification of disease is based on stratification and more often referred to as precision medicine, a refinement of evidence-based medicine. Following the more precise information on diagnosis, treatment, and risk, the management of disease can also be personalized based on objective measures, such as the monitoring of blood sugar, or subjective measures, such as patient preference, what one might call individualized medicine. These different but linked and interdependent ways of working are captured in a model we refer to as the EPOS model for evidence-based medicine, precision medicine, and personalized medicine based on objective or subjective variables, all of which aim to successively reduce the error in medical decision-making. A third area of concern, and the last point I want to make, is the challenge that the global, yes, even pandemic proportion and presence of cardiometabolic disease poses to the healthcare system, or rather to many different and developing healthcare systems. It is highly unlikely that healthcare solutions worked out in the global north, or what is known as high-income countries, is going to work in the global south, the low and middle-income countries. In fact, for a number of reasons, they may not be suitable in the global north either. So rather than copycatting global north, global south will have to leapfrog healthcare development to get to a more sustainable and appropriate system to meet these challenges. Much in the same way as telecommunications by landline was leapfrogged to get to mobile solutions in many countries. This way, I believe that global north should listen to and work together with global south, because there is much to be learned. A related issue is what one might call the practice of access medicine. The view that conditions are so far from global north and so poor in global south that the number one problem is the sheer access to medicine. The implication here is that all would be good if only access to a one-size-fits-all solution, often the cheapest solution, could be obtained. However, this is neither an equitable nor an effective way of working. Of course, there has to be access to medicine, but again, it must be based on accurate prediction of diagnosis, treatment, and prognosis for it not to risk being access to inefficient treatment with more adverse than beneficial effects, more harm than good. This is indeed why implementation of precision medicine might even be more important in low and middle income countries than it is in high income countries, and why we should not resort to the practice of access medicine. In summary, to address one of the current megatrends, the global rise in cardiometabolic disease, which, by the way, is interacting with communicable diseases and climate change. To address cardiometabolic disease, we need to do a great number of things. I've pointed to 3 opportunities. We need to, 1, democratize the access to diagnosis. 2, reclassify disease and rejuvenate the practice of medicine through the EPOS cycle: evidence-based medicine, precision medicine, personalized medicine based on objective and subjective variables, leading to a reduction of error in medical decision-making. And 3, refrain from the practice of pure access medicine, but work together between Global North and Global South and learn from Global South as they leapfrog healthcare development to allow for efficient and equitable solutions. It is about time. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Martin, all the way from Norway. Now, ladies and gents, you will see I very strategically have this makeshift clipboard, because the people that we are going to listen to during the course of the night, their accolades and accomplishments and qualifications are just so much. I mean, please do excuse me, I won't be able to remember all of them. When we compiled the list of speakers, we looked at people that can offer us very distinctive points of view from the faculty and the healthcare profession. And our next speaker offers us, let's say, from a student perspective. But this is no ordinary student. I have the pleasure of introducing to you Mr. Vudi Ravutsi. Vudi is a final year MBCHB student and a demonstrated student leader. He has served on various leadership positions, most notably 2 terms on the TSRC, first both policy officer and student community needs officer, and then as the chairperson, being on the Stellenbosch University Student Representative Council Executive Committee. Other positions include the Vice Primarius of Hippocrates Residence, tutor mentor, and member of the Heisu Ubuntu management team. His journey through student leadership is highlighted by his active stance on creating and facilitating a transformative student experience, efficiency of engagement, and the implementation of a transformative policy that governs student life. Vudi is an A.B. Bailey Fellow and has been awarded multiple accolades on leadership, including the SU's Rector's Award for Excellent Achievement and the TSRC Honorary Colors Award for Leadership and Service. Please can we give Vudi a big round of applause.
Okay, so I decided to open my talk with one of my favorite anecdotes, and I'll tell you a bit of a story. There were once learners in an elementary school who were asked to write an essay about what they wanted God to do for them. When the teacher was marking these essays at home, one of them in particular made her very emotional, and her husband walked in and he found her crying and asked, "Why are you crying?" And the teacher asked the husband to read one of the essays. It read, this was one of the learners: "God, please make me into a television set. I want to replace the television set at my house. I want to get the attention that the television set gets at my house. I want to get the care, the same care that it gets when it's not working. I want the same attention my father gives it, even when he comes back home tired from work." The husband exclaims, "God, poor kid, what horrible parents." And the teacher said to the husband, "That's our son's essay." Next slide, please. Student life is grossly divided into academics and student affairs. If I give you a list of different concepts, one can easily categorize them into those 2 gross categories, academics and student affairs, be it well-being, networking, teaching and learning assessments, etc. All these factors contribute towards the student experience and in turn, this concept of student success. Next slide, please. As a student leader, one is both positioned and expected to facilitate the realization of this ideal, as highlighted in our student constitution. One is required to identify and work towards the eradication of barriers to the exercising of rights listed under the Bill of Rights on said constitution, rights to freedom of expression, quality education, justifiable means of assessment, etc., etc. The question is, what are these barriers? Well, my broad impromptu answer to that would be status quo, the systems we uphold. What is normal? What is accepted in our environment? Who is it normal for? Who thrives in this system? All these are necessary questions that we need to ask. Next slide. The very essence of my student leadership journey, from student communities all through to student governance, has been just that, to ask these questions, to engage and employ a solutions-driven approach. Sorry, I lost my cue. To ask these questions, to engage and employ a solutions-driven approach to realize this ideal and ensure that the entire profile of students not only succeeds, but thrives. There is an abundance of critical engagement around the concept of student success and promoting a transformative student experience within the South African context, from equitable access to student support. But I think we need to take it a bit deeper than that. What is relevant in our environment? In medicine and health sciences, in our clinical platforms, is there need, space, and willingness to transform? How does it all affect patient care? One of the points that I believe are and should be very high up in our agenda is mental health as a fundamental pillar of well-being within our environment. My last report contains a critical and inquisitive memorandum I wrote concerning a necessary self-reflective process we should undergo to destigmatize, promote awareness, and counteract mental health issues, especially within medicine and health sciences. Next slide, please. We have increasing numbers of burnout, imposter syndrome, newly diagnosed anxiety and major depressive disorder, unhealthy coping mechanisms, even extending to the extremes like psychosis and suicide attempts amongst our students in medicine and health sciences across the entire country. This being more evident, in my perspective or opinion, from when students start their clinical years, as we use an apprenticeship model in health sciences. Here in Stellenbosch University, we have made significant progress in curating and improving different mechanisms to address this. There's commendable work being done across the universities in functions of student support to mitigate these growing numbers. Personally, throughout my whole journey as a student leader, I've had a total number of 26 cases, majority of whom were emergent through this system. This is clearly a significant issue, but are we addressing it from the roots? What causative and contributing factors are we upholding? Again, what is our normal? Although not the blueprint, it is still not alien to have a patient pass away in front of you and then just moving on to the next bed and continue seeing patients without a debrief. That is not normal, and it should not be normal. But are we loud enough about it? Consequences to this are pretty obvious in my opinion, especially for students. Students are always in a constant state of ubiquitous assimilation. They're always learning and taking in information. And the last thing we want is to create dehumanized healthcare professionals. The dean spoke about vulnerability the other day. To what extent are we having those conversations? The status quo within medicine and health sciences is what has been studied as the culture of academic medicine and medical education. The conjunction of the Socratic dialogue with the negativity bias is a proven and effective method of teaching and learning medicine, however not devoid of adverse effects, if not used within certain boundaries. How do we do this in a transformative manner? In fact, research shows that something as simple as utilizing positive psychology in our teaching and learning spaces has significant impact, not only on the learning outcomes, but the sustainability of healthcare professionals. How can we produce excellent doctors who are sustainable to in turn impact patient care and the healthcare system even more? Next slide, please. Equitable access, amongst other interventions, is promoting more and more saturation of the sphere of medicine and health sciences by different people from different walks of life. This is an excellent opportunity to drive these conversations around transformation, from intercultural communication, language barriers, racism, microaggressions, bullying, all of which not only improves the quality of healthcare we provide, but also the health of our teaching and learning spheres. How effective are our teaching mechanisms? How protective are we of vulnerable students and colleagues? How tolerant are we? We need to create an environment of shared responsibility in order to realize and facilitate this ideal. Next slide, please. Remember the learner I spoke about in the beginning of the talk? To what extent is that learner one of our students? To what extent is it one of our junior doctors? To what extent is it you sitting in front of me today? To what extent are we aware of one another? Today we launch a monumental building as another significant moment in the history of our faculty. This is and is to be a significant home for critical thinking, innovation, research, and advancement for the benefit of our society. And it is bound to take our institution to new heights in accordance with the institution's Vision 2040. We as students are extremely privileged and thrilled by this occasion. My take-home message is, as we continue to make excellent breakthrough advancements, let's transform. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rudy. I really do appreciate that. Let's give him one round of applause. And even with all that technical difficulty, he still has 32 seconds on the clock, and well done, 10 points. Okay, so let's go straight on to our next speaker, and she joins us all the way from up north. She comes from University of Pretoria, and I've got the privilege to introduce Professor Flavia Senkubuche. And I'm just going to say Prof. Flavia because I've been speaking to her the whole time, so do excuse me. She is a specialist in public health medicine and with a PhD in public health and an MBA from the Edinburgh Business School. She is Deputy Dean of Stakeholder Relations at the Faculty of Health Sciences, as mentioned, at the University of Pretoria. She is the 20th President of the Colleges of Medicine and the first Black woman to hold this position. I believe also the youngest to hold that position. She is the current chair, yes, well done, 10 points, 12. She is the current chair of the WHO Afro-Region Africa Advisory Council on Research and Development, president of the Women in Global Health South Africa, and vice president of the African Federation of Public Health Association. She is a fellow of the Kofi Annan Global Health Leadership Fellowship and was recognized as one of the 50 powerful women in South Africa by Mail and Guardian's Power of Women in 21. In 2022, she was recognized by Harvard Public Health as one of the 25 standout voices in African public health. You see why I need this clipboard. Yo, Prof. Flavia, the stage is yours. Let's give her a round of applause.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and I don't know where Felix got all those tidbits because they definitely were not in my biography, I think. I cannot say how greatly humbled and honored and absolutely flattered I am this evening to be invited to such an auspicious occasion. And as a child of the African soil who's been privileged to be born and raised on this incredible continent, and to be part of the ever-rolling hills, our incredible sunset, our beautiful skies, the resilience of our people, the compassion of our communities, and the love of our society, to be part of Africa. Our challenges, our successes, everything that I do is with Africa at the soul and heart and center of it all. So when it came to the invitation to discuss how we innovate and improve the lives through groundbreaking science, my answer was and will always be with heart and grit and with Africa at the core and soul of it. Heart and grit. Next slide, please. Such a bold and challenging phrase, but what does it truly mean? To me, it means defying norms, going beyond what is expected, taking risks, going against the grain, bringing about new and innovative ideas that could be very unpopular. but nonetheless challenging ourselves, our institutions, and our existing systems to think outside the box and be daring enough to venture into previously uncharted territories. And if we are going to commit to improve the lives through breaking and breakthrough science, we need to do it with heart, and we need to do it with grit. Next slide, please. There is an old age African adage that says a bird that flies off the ground and lands on an anthill is still on the ground. And so in order for us to create long-lasting and impactful legacies in improving lives with breakthrough science, we have to aim to be that bird that flies off the ground, never lands on the anthill, but soars to the highest heights. But in order to soar, it would mean breaking some boundaries by unmasking the reality of how our evidence and science as African scholars is addressed, is perceived, is received, and is used. Next slide, please. I call it the science cataract. So I recently had a conversation with a friend of mine who is in a very different field, and she recently submitted a paper with a colleague. And the topic was within the field of African philosophy. I would like to introduce you to my friend and her colleague. Let's call them Janine and Nomsa. Next slide, please. Janine holds a PhD in African philosophy. She's been working in the field for over 20 years. She is a leading researcher. Nomsa is a global doyen of African philosophy and has been working in the field for 25 years. She also holds a PhD and, in fact, was recently recognized with a global award for her work. Back to the response on the submission at our global conference, and that was to discuss African philosophy. As you can see, rejected. Yes, the paper was rejected, and the reasons were along the following lines. We find your work quite interesting, love and recognize the work that you have done, the enormous contribution to this field, but there were other papers that were important, and we look forward to your next submission. Next slide, please. So who were the papers? It was Jack from Sweden, Peter from the UK, Marlene from the US, Mark from Australia, all non-African authors and from non-African countries who were at the opening plenary, and they were part of the speakers who were talking about African philosophy. There wasn't a single representative or voice from the African continent. I dare boldly say, I don't think it's very different in our fraternity. So here's my question. In a time where the global conversations about African continent are increasing and the innovations are being created to improve the lives of Africans, should we not as Africans be part of those conversations? Why is the science by scholars from Africa minimized, invisibilized, and why does it need what I call, cue the slide please, global splaining? Global splaining. Why the cataract, I ask again. And so I believe that we've arrived at a pivotal point in scientific development globally where African science must be respected, because unapologetically, even in this room, many in our field and in our different fields not only drive the scientific agenda, they are the experts. And so we need heart, grit, and tenacity to say no more. We need radical cataract surgery. I have to pause because as a public health physician, I might get into trouble. As a public health physician, I can attest to the fact that our world today faces numerous challenges. These range from poverty, diseases, conflict, climate change, and yes, in Africa in particular, we definitely share a massive slice of the burden of disease. Therefore, the reality is that as the scientists of this community, we are at the coalface of these lived conditions. Our science matters and our science is valid. We can no longer sit back and have our work be globally explained by others who do not understand our context, don't know our lived realities, don't know our language, and refuse to call us by the name that we call ourselves. Because Ngugi wa Thiong'o said, call the people by the name that they call themselves. And so we call ourselves mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, scientists, but we call ourselves scholars who work in the African continent, yes, but certainly are on par and can give a run for their money, the global community. Therefore, so as to improve the lives of our people with our breakthrough science, African research and evidence has to be central to the decisions that we make about Africa. We need to bring African voices to the forefront to inform decision making. And African research should inform the design, implementation, and evaluation, the programs and the policies about our community. Therefore, as African academics and researchers, we need to be given the platform, the space, the audience to be able to voice our insights and the challenges and opportunities that are there. Yes, partnerships are important, but they have to be done with mutual respect and mutual recognition. The responsibility does lie with us colleagues, and so there should be no discussion about Africa without Africans. Because when you look at history, Africa had gold that enriched other nations. We had kings and queens that became slaves to strengthen the labor force of other nations. Our cotton, our cocoa, our diamonds, our platinum built empires, while our people decayed, they starved, they broke in the quest to simply survive. So let's not create a second generation of what I call neo-appropriation. Let's write our own stories, write our own books, sing our own songs, and be the authors of the better Africa created today for tomorrow. Cue the next slide, please. Let us be, as we launch this biomedical research institution, that bird that rises off the ground, flies, and soars to higher heights. I thank you.
Wow, sure. There's a movie, I'm not sure if you guys have watched it, it's one of the cues like literal chills. That's definitely there. I don't see my next speaker in this audience. I've got a feeling he's still in that room over there. So Dr. Darren Green, I don't know if he's planning on making an entrance. Oh, there he is. Sorry, I'm getting nervous if I lose a speaker. So while I introduce him, so as you can see, we've got different perspectives, and this perspective we're going to have now is on the, let's call it on the flip side, it's that TV. And I've got the pleasure of introducing Dr. Darren Green, who was born in Pietermaritzburg, and he completed both his undergraduate degree in medicine and 4 years of postgraduate training in neurology, and more recently finished off a master's in sports and exercise medicine, all at Stellenbosch University. He was also elected as the youngest president of the South African Medical Students Association. He has served our country on provincial and national level in various domains. He has achieved provincial colors in athletics, rugby, tennis, and was offered a scholarship to play rugby at Marty's after school. Darren went on to become an authority in the media, health, and wellness space after gracing the radio airwaves of 94.5, The Breakfast Show with Ryan O'Connor. This catapulted his popularity as one of the country's most engaging health personalities. Well, he didn't stop there. He's also no stranger to TV, as he continues to inspire millions of viewers through various productions, including being a regular multimedia health specialist on the popular Espresso Breakfast Show. His highlights on TV include Doctor's Orders, where he was nominated for a SAFTA Award and Best Presenter, Tussen Ons, and currently his own show on CakeNet entitled Medies met Dr. Darren Green. Trying my radio voice. Currently, Darren operates as an event medicine specialist, heading up the corporate events department for Mediclinic Southern Africa. Darren functions as the chief medical officer for many international sporting events, including the World Cup Rugby Sevens, British Irish Lions Tour, Cape Town Cycle Tour, ABSA Cape Epic, and the Cape Town Marathon. Marathon after that. Darren, it's my pleasure to welcome to the stage. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you. There we go. Thank you so much. Enjoy. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Would you like to stretch your calves quickly? DVT prophylaxis, evidence-based movement prevents DVTs. I've got some surgeons in the room that will agree, I'm sure, that taught me as an undergrad. I'm teasing. Good evening. It's an honor to be with you this evening. Thank you for the wonderful opportunity from the faculty. And indeed, always an honor to come back to your alma mater and to walk these corridors. Much improved corridors, might I add. Right, let's start off by saying, I reflected on why I became a medical scholar, or a scholar in medicine rather, and I was reminded of the Hippocratic Oath. Remember that, those words. And it took me back and challenged my life journey thus far, and reflects obviously on the spelling of the word, Hippocratic versus hypocritic. And I hope today that we live forward to the original spelling of Hippocratic rather than hypocritic as scholars in medicine. Because that's the challenge facing us as we move into an era that challenges Western medicine to a large degree. On that point, the fundamental principles of doing no harm, doing good, remember them? I'll read them. Beneficence, non-maleficence, autonomy, and justice. Recall those? We all strive to remind ourselves of those when things get tough and the tough want to get going. But let's take a quick look at some interesting features of being a medical scholar in my life. I hope to share with you. So let's see if this works. There we go. So first and foremost, I must say that I'm human. I bleed, I feel, I cry, and I have the ability to grow and learn, and with that, to show promise, to survive with a tribe rather than on my own. I work in a field, not just being a dad, a husband, as a friend, a colleague, but also as a medical doctor in the field of eventing medicine, as you heard. And some of you might be asking, but what the ding-dong is eventing medicine? I don't arrange tea parties and bar mitzvahs. I certainly work as a medical specialist in the field of sports medicine and emergency medicine, but where we take medicine to the bush, we take it out to the Cape Epic, we take it out with mass participation events of 30,000 cyclists for the cycle tour, the Cape Town Marathon. We do all sorts of things worldwide in terms of World Rugby Sevens, all those magnificent cycling and mountain biking events that span the globe. And it's an honor to work in that field and serve people that are of all backgrounds in terms of elite athletes as well as amateur athletes across these platforms. So when it comes to eventing medicine, obviously you ask yourself, but how does science help me? Because that's what we're speaking about, breakthrough science. And I wondered if they sent the invite to the wrong person for this evening. But anyway, I'm here. So I'll tell you how science has helped me. And maybe it will trigger some of those pictures over there. So if you look at those pictures, you'll see the bottom left-hand corner. Anyone know what that is? That big tool with the big knob on the end of it. It is what's called a heat stress index monitor. We use that to measure, for example, the wet bulb globe test, the ambient air temperature, we assess humidity, we assess the wind chill factor, which is essential in mitigating risk and moving resources around on the ground, shortening the route, changing the route, moving ice and water plans around during a mass participation event, looking at dehydration, people falling out due to heat stroke, heat illness, renal failure, and rhabdomyolysis. While doing that, technology and science has provided me with insights through tech and designing lifetime apps that give me updates from 15 points along a route of something like the cycle tour, where at lifetime I can see how many patients are presenting with gastro, for example. How many patients are presenting with falls, wrist injuries, forearm fractures, knee injuries, etc. Lifetime, while 30,000 people are on the road, I can see across the spectrum exactly what's going on. In that way, manage the risk profile of the event, ensuring the safety of those athletes, whether they're running marathons or cycling. How else has science helped me? If you look at that picture, in the middle there, those two lovely ladies in red are from a pathological service, PathCare. They're one of the people that provide point of care. We've moved to a place where we can no longer thumbsuck and treat dehydration to thirst when dealing with elite athletes riding the Cape Epic, for example. We serve the world in terms of our niche expertise with people coming here to compete in one of the world's most grueling cycling events on the globe. I can't base a decision to pull someone that's paying 150K to enter an event on a thumbsuck and whether he's thirsty or not, and whether he's produced urine or not in the past 5 to 6 hours. We have on-site point of care with iStat machines where people are able to test renal function, quantify our creatinines, look at the potassium, guide us in terms of doing ECGs, looking for rhythm disturbances, and then managing the patients at the highest level, even while being away from centers of excellence, like our big brown building right next door to us. So isn't it incredible? So there's so many of these things that have added. So I just want to introduce you to eventing medicine if you haven't been there before. Have a look at this. Number 14, Geo Aplon goes down. The commentator speaks of him going down like a rag doll. Look at this one. I'm going to go back and see if we can get this one to work again. There we go. Look for the contact. That's Rocco Speckman, also played for the Springboks. And you can see the effect of, the reason why I'm showing you this is to move on to a point of where science has brought us. Breakthrough science, ladies and gentlemen, is looking after the people I've just showed you when they can't look after themselves. How many of you have seen the movie Concussion with Will Smith? Hands up. Quite a heart-wrenching movie looking at the effect of chronic brain injury and chronic traumatic encephalopathy on athletes and the cost that it comes at in terms of your disability, which could be permanent down the line. So that's why I've decided to raise concussion as one of the hot topics here this evening. The debate around the definitions are actually incredibly inconsistent. Different sporting codes refuse to call a concussion brain injury. Only recently, you'll see in 2016 that World Rugby, due to the load of concussion, moved their operational definition of concussion to include the word brain injury. An increased number of class action legal suits and lawsuits have led to a greater awareness. The cumulative effect of undiagnosed concussion. How do you know when to take someone off the field? How do you know when to let them carry on playing? What we didn't know until 2011 was that 56% of our rugby players, for example, were allowed to continue after a suspected concussion, before we developed later on what we call field side or pitch side assessment tools. So there is heightened awareness, and you're going to join me on this journey. Over time, the definition certainly, as I said, remained contentious. But understanding the primary mechanism, I mean, you've got the beautiful brain surrounded by CSF, floating around, not connected to the skull in any way, with this absolutely incredible force and speed of the force, changing direction, acceleration, deceleration, etc., leading to obviously coup, contra coup injuries of the brain, diffuse axonal injury. You remember all those terms, I'm sure. But in fact, we need to know that the different sporting codes, as I've mentioned, they have steered away from using the term brain injury until 2016. In 21, just to give you a timeline quickly for your reference, 2001, the first concussion in sport gathering, Vienna, 1,000 papers were reviewed. In 2012, the first sideline assessment tool was designed. In 2016, the operational definition changed in terms of what concussion is with a 3-point definition. And in 2022, the International Consensus Conference reviewed how many papers? 80,000 papers in looking at our new consensus in terms of designing improved mechanisms of increasing the specificity and sensitivity. This graph absolutely confirms that. If you look at that, unfortunately the pointer doesn't work on the screen, so I'm going to ask you to look at the blue line quickly, which is your incidence per 1,000 player hours on the rugby field, and you'll see the index on the side there, 5, 10, 15, 20. And you can look at the year 2011, where we started with the pitch side assessment, where we looked at things like balance, gait, clinical. Off the field to assess them and to make sure that they didn't have a concussion based on a clinical suspicion, they carried on playing. So that was very powerful and led to, obviously, further development in terms of our tools. I've mentioned that prior to 2011, there were no sideline assessments, 57%. And why Africa is important, why South Africa is also important, is we trialed the first pitch side assessment for concussion in 2012 at the Junior World Cup, held where? Right here in Cape Town. And the findings from that then led to the development of the SCAT tools that we now use in head injury assessments across the globe. So we are very much involved with research in the field. I've mentioned that the assessment now includes symptoms, balance, cognitive, and clinical descriptions with a great degree of 70 to 80% predictability of concussion, and that is not good enough. We have to strive for more objective ways of testing for concussion. We need a technique that never misses a concussion, but doesn't overdiagnose or remove someone from the field of play, because then the players just lose faith in us, or the athletes lose faith in us. Taking off too many players at one time would cause a loss of credibility. And the objective methods that I speak about, ladies and gentlemen, are breaking barriers. So where are we right now? What does the future look like in terms of managing head injury and concussion? We know about hyperbaric oxygen. We know that that works in terms of traumatic brain injury. To what extent? We are still busy studying that. What we're looking at right here, obviously, is looking for objective measures. Scrum caps that parents are buying at length were proven in 2020 to not decrease the odds ratio of you even developing a concussion in the first place. In fact, it gives the small kids a Superman syndrome and encourages them to do reckless things and even get a higher risk of being injured. That's a nice dinner time conversation for you this weekend. And then we looked at gum guards. You know the gum guards? How interesting is it that the gum guards now have methods that they are researching to look at the force accelerations, directions, as well as quantity of assessing the impact of these forces and the transmission of these forces to the brain in getting objective evidence of a significant hit or not. And then lastly, I must advise the saliva test is even more exciting, where they're looking at microRNA and looking at those specific biomarkers in your saliva where the athlete swabs their mouth, for example, and where we can pick up traumatic brain injury using microRNA within the first few hours after concussion. There's exciting things on the horizon, and we are part of this. South Africa is part of that, if you didn't know. Lots of conversation to be had about that. And then the last one I mentioned there is artificial intelligence. You know AI? What's that other one called? Chat thingy? Yeah, I thought you didn't know. So anyway, so understanding too that AI, ladies and gentlemen, can also be used to analyze the video analysis lifetime videos. I don't know how many of you know, when we assess head injuries on a rugby field, we actually have a device called Hawkeye now because of the new pitch side assessment. Video analysis is part of our elite rugby game in the country, where we can actually diagnose concussion or suspected concussion even retrospectively on the field. I sit next to the field, I'm looking at the video footage live. So we're not watching the game like everyone else is. We're looking for subtle signs and criteria that are quite important. But understanding that those video cameras take up to 17 or 18 angles of the game at any given time. They're situated in the corner flags, on the side of the field, in the pavilions, etc., all around the playing field. So there are major advances that have been added to our field of research in terms of concussion. And this is not only for elites. The implementation of the learnings from these things have been implemented by BoxSmart in South Africa to reach our communities in terms of schoolboy and schoolgirl rugby, in terms of other concussion sports where you have contact sports and even non-contact sports in concussion. Just this week, we heard of a boy from Paarl Boys, and our thoughts are with him and his family right now. No malicious mechanism, just fell back onto the back of his head and unfortunately had a brain bleed that needed surgery, and currently busy with the acute management of that. This is important, this is significant, and science and breakthrough science will be playing a role in the next few years in the lives of our families and our community. I end off with this, which says the smartest people are constantly revising their understanding, reconsidering a problem they thought they'd already solved. 70 to 80% sensitivity, specificity in diagnosing concussion is not enough. We're looking for objective methods in moving forward, and Africa is part of that. Thank you for inspiring me.
Thank you so much, Darren. Sure, interesting times, interesting conversations to be had, and that's exactly what I invite you to do now. If you'd be so kind as to go back to the atrium, the lovely area that you had a reception, and join us for some drinks and canapes, and then we are going to come back for the last 4 speakers. So please, thank you so much, and we'll see you in about half an hour. Thank you. We've got 4 exciting speakers coming up, and I'm very humbled to introduce the next one to us. She is the dean of this faculty, the leader of the faculty. I was given clear instructions, the lights are not allowed to be dim, so I just got a heart attack now. Jeez, Megan? Yeah, no. Okay. Prof. Elmi Miller. She's the dean of the faculty, and after completing her MBCHB in '95, she worked at various hospitals in England, while her husband was doing his doctorate in musicology at Oxford University. She did basic surgical training in the United Kingdom between '98 and 2000, and then trained further as a general surgeon at UCT after she returned to South Africa. Elmi turned to transplant surgery after completing her surgical exams in 2004, and the first time I heard this, the person that told me this, they said to me, yes, it's actually her. She made history. And I was like, what do you mean? And they said to me, she went on to perform the first HIV positive to positive kidney transplant ever, like Guinness World Book of Records stuff. I was like, phew, now I'm nervous. Okay. Today, Prof. Miller serves on various international bodies in recognition of her pioneering work. She's an honorary member of the European Surgical Society and a member of the World Health Organization Transplantation Task Force. In addition, she is president of the Transplantation Society, a global NGO, and often speaks internationally about Africa's challenges in organ regulation and transplantation. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Prof. Elmi Miller.
Thank you very much for that introduction. So I think the way we work today and the way we're going to be working in 20 years' time is very different. There are some people that say, why are we still training radiologists? We're not going to need them. There are even some people who say, why are we still training doctors? Because we're probably not going to need them. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I think machine learning and technology is going to do for us in the next 20 years. But what many people in the audience don't think about, and what is really true, is that we're already in an environment where technology is dominating our lives. This morning I woke up with a personal feed on my cell phone. These million-dollar industries are already in place and changing our lives as we speak. So in medicine, we're probably going to see some huge changes over the next 20 years. Radiology is a place where image dominates, and machine perfusion and AI really works very well with images. So we know that some of these models outperform humans by reporting images in radiology, but also in other fields like pathology, where there are a lot of images, and possibly even in surgery. There are many, many articles showing what machine learning can do for us as clinicians. If you look at that slide, you'll see it's more than thousands. So already we are knowing that this is going to impact on medical and clinical practice dramatically. If we want to measure growth with a linear graph and we don't have enough space on the paper, we have to use an exponential growth curve. So I'm going to show you the exponential growth of surgery and where I think this is going to go to. Now, people had the skill set to make instruments and knives and possible things that surgery could be done for many, many years, but it didn't happen. Why did it not happen? Because of pain, because of bleeding, and because of infection control. Those things were the limitations why surgery couldn't develop as much. So when this was addressed in the mid-19th century, surgery started to be established. So the first thing that made surgery grow was the invention of ether and chloroform that could take away a patient's pain. But then, just about 10 years later, in 1860, Lisser made a wonderful decision to wash his hands before he does an operation. And this also had a major impact because sepsis immediately started to reduce. And in 1922, Halstead said, well, why don't I just sterilize a glove and put that on and see what happens? And once again, infection rates dropped and made a huge impact on surgery. There were other things that happened in that time. Because patients didn't have so much pain, they could sit still and there was less bleeding. So that impacted on outcomes. And also x-rays, because surgeons could now start planning what they are going to do instead of just finding a surprise when they open a limb or an abdomen. Between the next sort of era of 1922 and 1980, a lot of things changed. We moved from a place where we were doing amputations, abscesses, very small little surgical procedures, to doing a lot of new things. Transplantation developed, open heart surgery, intra-abdominal surgery, and today we know we've got laser surgery, we've got laparoscopic surgery, computer-assisted surgery, so things have really developed dramatically in this time frame. And also, suture material have changed, prosthetic material have changed, and this has opened the landscape of possibility for surgery. The question is, what is next? Where are we going to go from here? Now, I'm going to discuss this with this very simple surgical operation. This is a bread and butter surgical operation for a general surgeon. It's called a laparoscopic cholecystectomy. Very simple procedure. Lots of people do it. If you start as a young surgeon, that will probably be one of your most common procedures. But it's not that simple if you injure the common bile duct. If that happens, it's devastating to the patient. And the safety margin for this is quite complicated to learn. But if we use a robot and we feed that robot with multiple images of multiple anatomical variants, and that robot understands what is safe and what is dangerous, this machine can now start warning the surgeon while doing the operation whether the surgeon is safe or not. And this changes the probability of injuring the common bile duct to such a low possibility that the 95% confidence index that surgeons would normally only have when they've done about 10,000 of these operations is now available to a junior surgeon who's just starting out in the field. So it has really impacted dramatically on safety in many surgical settings. The second thing that artificial intelligence is doing is it's changing the possibility of assessment. Now, this is so important. If we assess each other, or we assess as senior surgeons, junior surgeons, it's very difficult to be consistent and to do it in the same way every time. By using a robot or artificial intelligence, we can have a much more finer and precise way of doing both formative and summative assessment. And this really opens up the possibility of training better, giving surgeons point of care training really relevant to their own ability and their own needs. We know that we want to improve post-operative outcome for patients, and we know that this is linked to technical skill. So by improving assessment, giving a surgeon feedback on their fine motor skills, on how they are doing their movements, how they are suturing, we can train that surgeon to become much better with away from a subjective method, but with an objective method that is done by artificial intelligence. And this will improve post-op outcomes dramatically. But it's very interesting because we don't always realize, but artificial intelligence and machine learning can do something else as well, which has a very important impact on the team. This is looking at the surgical team, discussing how they communicate, discussing how they react, giving them feedback as a team between the different surgeons, between the surgeon and anesthetist, and helping them to improve some of the ways that they are working. Now, we know that surgery has got two major issues that impacts its success: tissue, injury, and bleeding. So by using these techniques, we can reduce tissue injury and we can measure bleeding. So the robot can actually measure the velocity of the surgical bleeding during the operation, during different phases, compare it and benchmark it against other surgeons, and give the surgeon a very constructive feedback at the end of the operation, which really improves the way we can work. So it opens up something which we call targeted educational solutions. Instead of having a fit-all educational process where we say, let's do it the same way for everybody, we can now target our individual surgeon with individual training possibilities. So what has artificial intelligence done, and is it doing for us today? It is moving us from safe surgery to ultra-safe surgery. There are, of course, challenges. Firstly, a robot which has multiple images can't prioritize. It can't make decisions in what is going to be the more efficient or the less efficient. So we will always need a human for that part. Secondly, humans have an ethical landscape. So we have to think about what is happening to personal information of patients. If we have these many images out in the world, there's a lot of risk for us in terms of patients' personal information, and we need to constantly think about that. And thirdly, some decisions are made with emotion rather than with these measurable outcomes. End-of-life decisions, palliative care decisions, those things will always probably need a human. I want to ask, do you think you would trust an artificial intelligence robot to do your surgery or to do your healthcare? My answer is probably yes. People have what we call automation bias. They actually trust machines more than they other human beings. If you put your GPS on your phone, you're more likely to follow that than following my instructions. And sometimes even if you have a gut feeling about the GPS going in the wrong direction or taking a longer road, you would still follow it because you believe in technology. Technology has the risk that it de-skills us, and we have to be honest, it is doing that. In the old days, people remembered everybody's telephone numbers. Today, we don't even consider that as an important thing. In fact, we don't even always remember our own number. Furthermore, as humans and as doctors, when we trained, we were taught to, for instance, remember dosages. We were asked what would be the dosage for a child or for somebody with this weight, and we had to work it out from memory. But today, if somebody gives you a dosage from memory, you think, why are they not checking this? Why are they not using Google to make sure this is correct? So I want to end up with this message. I think technology is there to make us safer. It is there to make us more educated. It is more agile, and it has a huge potential to enhance medical practice. But we will always need to have the human hand steering in this very complex future that we are facing. Thank you.
Right. Ooh, that was nice and loud. That Google Maps image, hey? When you see that blue line, you're like, I'm going to go this way, and then you hit traffic, and you're like, I knew I shouldn't have trusted this Google Maps. It happens every time. So when we were constructing the speaker lineup, one of the things I said we can't only have MBCHBs. We can't only have a medical point of view on breakthrough science, and this building represents that as well. There is not only medical MBCHBs, there are all types of healthcare professions in this building. So that gives me the honor of introducing the next speaker, Prof. Lumeri Creer. So Prof. Lumeri Creer obtained an M in Political Studies from the University of Cape Town in '89 and a master's and PhD in Clinical Psychology from Boston University in 1996. She completed an American Psychological Association accredited internship for clinical psychology at the Massachusetts Mental Health Center from the Harvard Medical School, also in '96. A runner-up for the National Award for Distinguished Women Researcher in 2016. She was also awarded a B2 rating by the NRF in 2017. So I just want to pause there. That I learned recently means something. Being a non-academic, really, like NRF rated, I was like, why are they rating their researchers? Just look at the so it means something. So just a little FYI. She has been a lecturer and clinical supervisor at the Department of Psychology at Stellenbosch since 1996, running the clinical program between 2000 and 2013, and being the chair of the department from 2019 to 21. In her research, she focuses on the emotional worlds of low-income South African mothers, utilizing mainly psychoanalytic, feminist, and postmodern theoretical frameworks. She also has a part-time practice in Stellenbosch for more than 25 years. Please join me in welcoming Prof. Creer. Thank you so much. Oh, she sat all the way at the back, so now it's that silence. I'm going to fill it with meaningless words. Thank you so much, Prof. Yeah, working.
Perfect. Good evening, everyone. It's a real honor to be here tonight, so thank you for inviting me. I was invited to talk on the theme of, and I quote, improving lives with breakthrough science, using my own lens of expertise. As you can see, my title of my talk is very timely after Almi's talk. I'm a clinical psychologist trained at a very Western institution in the US. I think if I have expertise, it is to never think that I am an expert. My expertise lies in to never know, but to always ask, wonder, watch, listen, to pay attention, and to attempt to make humans, specifically humans who have been marginalized, visible in my field. So instead of describing my research projects in detail, I'm going to tell you the story of one of my so-called clinical work with one woman. Her name is Wilmien Wilders. I hope that this simple story will show that Wilmien's emotional problems are complex and multi-layered. I'm standing at a very strange angle. Apart from her formal diagnosis, she's a unique woman with a very specific history, a particular personality, an unconscious defensive style that we don't find in all people diagnosed with depression. She also presents with acute and literal hunger. Poverty is embodied in her emaciated frame. Despite everything, however, there also are powerful moments of agency, connection, and ever so often, even pleasure. The context within which she develops her problem is also quite specific and informs her problems. This is post-apartheid South Africa, where powerful neoliberal and patriarchal discourses still make individual women responsible for taking care of children and feeding them, where individuals are shamed and blamed for their problems and may become violent in response, where there still are impermeable and well-policed walls between rich and poor, where race and gender still matter in the worst ways possible. I hope my story indirectly answers the question that I was asked to respond to by the event organizers. Here is the story. I drive to the clinic on a cold winter's day. There's snow on the mountains. The clinic, as always, is cold and smells like Dettol and paper files. Wilmien Wilders is 43 years old. The nurses at the clinic referred her to me because she's severely depressed. Major depressive disorder, the file says. The diagnosis of so many of the women that I see. Her file is very fat with medical ailments. The last inscriptions, 10 April, vaginal discharge, swelling in groin, appointment for a pap smear. 16 April, pain in the chest, appointment at Stellenbosch Hospital. 3 May, pap smear amitriptyline, appointment with Lumery. Appointment with Lumery means that the nurses don't know what to do with her. Wilmien walks into the consultation room, sits down and cries, big tears. I'm hungry, very, very hungry, she says. I wait. And me and my husband, we are separated from bed and table. I don't have a feeling for him anymore. I wait. And as a psychologist, I deal with bad relationships all the time, but I do not know what to do with hunger. I ask about the relationship first. The couple got married on 28 September 20 years ago. They have 2 sons, a 20-year-old and an 11-year-old. Wilmien says that it will be nothing for her to divorce her husband. He drinks and he smokes dagga, he beats her when he's drunk and high, and he does not give her any money. I want to go on my own, she says. And then she brings hunger back into the room. I don't know what I'm going to eat tonight, or the children. I'll just send the baby to the in-laws. They always give him food. They are fond of him. On the wall of the consultation room, instructions for inserting a female condom, cheerfully colored pictures of how you can get the HIV virus and how not. A handwritten note from the nurse to herself. Josie, how popular is Jesus in your life? I change the topic again. I ask about work. Wilmien lost a job as a factory worker a few years ago. She had the job for 12 years. I don't really know what happened. Things start going bad. And I said to my supervisor, as jy vir my 'n gat grawe, gaan jy in jou eie gat val. If you dig a hole for me, you will fall in it yourself. Then they let me go. She has not worked since. Who is going to give a 43-year-old work, she asks. I look at her. Mental status exam. She looks much older than 43. She's wearing a few layers of clothes. She lifts up her jacket to show me how loose her clothes are. Her body is bony and small and scarred, but tough. Her face is crinkly with slanting eyes and high cheekbones. The laughing lines of her eyes make her seem amused, even though her mouth stays sad. And in that year, my mother also died, my pillar of strength. She tells me that she also has high blood and a heart. I look at the fat clinic file. I don't feel up to it anymore, she says. I ask about her history. This is what my training taught me to do. Does hunger have a history? Does it matter? Wilmien was the oldest child and his 3 brothers, Paul, Jacob, and Patrick. All 4 children are from the same parents. When Wilmien was still very young, her father lost his eyes while pruning trees and received compensation from the government. With this money, he bought a plot in Weeping Willow Street, and this is where the family lived for most of Wilmien's childhood. Her father died when Wilmien was 14 or 15, and the family lost the house. I have my history, but Wilmien Wilders is still hungry. The only thing I can do as a psychologist is to make an appointment for the next week. In the next few weeks, we talk about empowerment without ever using the word. After our first session, she comes weekly, always on time, always with the tears on the seemingly amused face, telling me how hungry she is, how ashamed she is, how angry she is, and how sad she is. Together we make plans. We agree that her biggest priority is to get a job. She cannot force her husband if she's not independent. She does not want to go back to the factory. We decide that she should go to the Bergsig Training Center to take a house management course. We have to figure out how she will get money for the taxi fare for the initial appointment at Bergsig. Psychologists do not give their patients taxi fares. She gets the fare somewhere anyway and enrolls for the 6-week course. When I see her again 6 weeks later, she's in the waiting room when I arrive. She runs to me with wide open arms in soap opera style. I say Wilmin in soap opera style. She laughs the deepest laugh as she hugs me. The crowd in the waiting room stares at us. I finished my course, she says. We got diplomas yesterday. In the kitchen of the clinic, no consultation rooms available on this day, I ask, what have you learned, Wilmin? Everything, she says. I learned that a mop actually is a dweil. A mop is just a mop in English. And I learned to do washing, all the white stuff go together and all the colored stuff together. And how to iron and how to bake a chocolate cake. I baked a chocolate cake for the first time in my life on Monday, but then my big clong ate it all. Then I was very angry. We learned how to cook, not only food, but also macaroni and lasagna. I met a lot of new people, and I got along well with the teachers. Most of all, I struggled with making the bed. It's very difficult to make a bed. If I ever get a job, I will take the book along and will always look in the book at how to make a bed. But for my ironing, I got 30 out of 30, and I was in school 22 years ago. I think I'm going to do the frail care course in January also. The farewell yesterday was just very difficult. I even shed some tears. I could not wait to come and tell Lumeri. All of this in one breath. A cook, a koi, a klong in a dweil, a cake, a bed, a boy and a mop. On the way home, I also shed some tears. Our sessions end because soon after her report back, Wilmin gets a job. Weeks later, I drive home with my daughter, and at the corner of my street, I see Wilmin. I stop and call her. She seems delighted to see me. She explains that she got a job in this street a few blocks up from my house. I just struggle because I'm not allowed to sit on the people's chairs, she says, so I get tired. But I do not struggle to make the bed anymore. Who is this? Who is that, my daughter asks when we drive away. I do not know how to begin to answer the question.
Sure, more literal chills. Thank you, Lumeri. I appreciate that. Before we end tonight off after the last speaker, we're also going to show a video of this building, and I also invite you to keep in touch with us. We've got a public open day tomorrow that if you want to come do a tour of the BMRI, you're welcome to go book a ticket. Just go to the socials and you'll see how that's done. And talking about the heart, on a very different note, let me introduce our next speaker to you tonight, Prof. Ntumbelo Ntusi. Mispronounced his name, honestly, I know that. Ntumbeku Ntusi. Apologies, Prof. He is a cardiologist and a professor of medicine, currently appointed as the chair and head of the Department of Medicine at the University of Cape Town and Groote Schuur Hospital. He is the director of the SMRC UCT Extramural Research Unit on the intersection of non-communicable diseases and infectious diseases. He serves as the clinical lead for the cardiovascular magnetic resonance CMR at Groote Schuur Hospital. His primary research interest comprises cardiomyopathy and heart failure, inflammatory heart disease, including HIV-associated cardiovascular disease, resistant hypertension, and non-invasive imaging. He has published over 250 peer-reviewed manuscripts and is a recipient of numerous awards and prizes. He is passionate about postgraduate student supervision, mentoring, and mentoring young colleagues. Prof, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the stage. Thank you so much.
Thanks. It's an absolute pleasure to be here tonight. In thinking about breakthroughs in science, I thought I would share a story about some of the innovations that have come from our work on cardiomyopathies. Can I ask by a show of hand, how many of you know what cardiomyopathy is? So my goal is over the next 10 minutes to make all of you experts on cardiomyopathies. These are my disclosures. Since time immemorial, we have often thought of the heart as the seat of the human soul, and that a big heart is a desirable thing to have. A bigger heart, even better. And I'm sure many of you, whenever you speak about people who are kind, loving, and good-natured, you refer to them as having a big heart. And wisdom has been passed through generations on the value of being big-hearted. And I'm certain that most of you often give relationship advice, which goes, size does matter. It's not the size of the man, but the size of his heart that matters. But is a heart really a good thing to have when it's big? And while figuratively and metaphorically, it's desirable to have a big heart, medically and physiologically, it's quite unideal. And the causes of a big heart abound in high-income countries. Coronary artery disease and cardiomyopathies are often predominant causes of big hearts. But in low and middle income countries, hypertension or high blood pressure, cardiomyopathies, rheumatic valvular heart disease, and infections of the heart lead to big hearts. So what is a cardiomyopathy? It's a disease of heart muscle, and morphofunctionally, we classify cardiomyopathies as hypertrophic, which means that the walls are thickened, dilated, which means that the chambers are enlarged, arrhythmogenic, which means that you've got abnormalities of electrical conduction leading to sudden cardiac death, or restrictive, which means that the wall of the heart is quite poorly compliant and relaxes very poorly. And these are defined as structural and functional disorders of heart muscle, which by definition must occur in the absence of coronary artery disease, hypertension, valvular heart disease, pericardial disease, and congenital heart disease. And we've written quite a lot about ethnicity-based and racial-based disparities in cardiomyopathies, which are uniformly associated with poor outcomes, particularly amongst Black people world over. So what do we know about cardiomyopathies in Africa? That they may be endemic, as in the case of dilated cardiomyopathy, peripartum cardiomyopathy, or endomyocardial fibrosis. We also have a high burden of non-endemic cardiomyopathies whose incidence and prevalence is comparable to other regions of the world. We also know that heart failure is the dominant form of heart disease amongst Africans. And because it affects young people who are economically active has a huge impact on African societies. These present with breathlessness, chest pain, arrhythmias, and sudden death. And so this is what a big heart from dilated cardiomyopathy looks like on cardiac MRI. And what you'll see in the top graph is that 50% of adults with a dilated cardiomyopathy will die within a year of diagnosis, and the other half will die in the next 5 to 10 years. Amongst children, 25% die within the first year after diagnosis, and then another 25% in the ensuing 5 to 10 years. So what do we know about cardiomyopathies amongst Africans? The term idiopathic means that you've got a disease of unknown origin, and we know that between 30 and 50% of people with idiopathic cardiomyopathies, the cause is genetic. And Africa is particularly interesting because it's the region of the world with the greatest genetic diversity. And you will see with the picture at the top, people from different regions of the continent look very different. But similarly, our hearts also look very different. But most importantly, the genes that account for the makeup of all of our organs in the body also have got the greatest genetic diversity. If you look at most countries around the world, you will see that the genetic lineages are often quite uniform. But in Africa, as you can see in the figure in the bottom, huge amount of diversity. Therefore, comparative studies of ethnic diversity is particularly important because it informs our understanding as humans. But also, our genetic makeup is informed by our interaction with the environment. And so the exposure to harsh environments and infections is a key driver of the diversity amongst Africans. This is an important study that we did about 10 years ago, where we took a 35 gene chip that is used in the NHS, in the National Health System in the UK, to diagnose hypertrophic cardiomyopathy with a yield of about 70%. And when we tested it on Black Africans, we found that the yield was only 29% in those that we were absolutely certain that they had genetic causes or familial causes of heart muscle disease. In addition, we found that the rates of mortality in HCM was similar to other parts of the world, around 25% over 10 years, and that your functional status was an important predictor of outcomes. But importantly, the mutation that you carried amongst Africans, unlike in other parts of the world, didn't predict mortality, and that the annualized mortality rate over time was similar to the general South African population. And this led us to establish a big, ambitious project to try and uncover the underlying genetic causes of cardiomyopathy amongst Africans that we refer to as EMOTEP, and you can read about it in these two papers. And I wanted to share with you just 2 examples. So over the last 6 years, we have reported on many new and known genes amongst Africans with heart muscle. But this publication in 2017 reported on the finding of cadherin-2 as a cause for arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy amongst our 2 cousins who came from a family with very high rates of sudden cardiac death as a consequence of this condition. And as you can see, the 3-generation pedigree and our filtration strategy, and the spherograms that show exactly where the mutation is. And this was a really important contribution because many groups in the US and China and Japan have now been able to find many families that have these mutations. Similarly, we've discovered a new mutation that also causes a very aggressive form of cardiomyopathy that is arrhythmogenic, associated with high burden of fibrosis. And when we transfect the gene that is mutant into zebrafish, we can recapitulate the model and so be confident that this is the cause. So you might ask yourself, why is this work important and why do we think this is interesting and why should you care? And that's because we can now do something about it. So my collaborator in Oxford, Hugh Watkins, just won one of the largest grants to study cardiovascular disease from the UK. And what we can now do is, if you've got a mutation that results in cardiovascular disease, using either anti-sense DNA or oligosense DNAs via CRISPR-Cas9 technology, you can splice out the defective gene and then use a vehicle to reintroduce healthy segments of your genetic material. And we can also look at RNA-based ways of delivering genetic material, either with microRNAs or small interrupting RNAs. And so we now have at our disposal a toolbox of molecular techniques that allows us, for instance, in this cohort with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, to be able to allow them to produce normal proteins that result in normal heart structure. So in summary, I've shown you that genetic cardiomyopathies are common, are an important cause of morbidity and mortality, and that our platform of studying genetics amongst Africans is hugely important because it's giving us new insights into underlying causes of genetic forms of cardiovascular disease, and that the advent of these new techniques for treatment of genetic cardiovascular disease gives hope that we can be able to change what has been a horrible diagnosis to have, with a very high rate of mortality, often in young people on this continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Reminds me of my BSc days when we learned about gene editing way back. We are on to our last speaker. We are running a bit behind schedule, but I do promise we will. We've saved the video for last, as I spoke about earlier, so we'll definitely get through that video so you can see what that video is. My next speaker is Prof. Tulio de Oliveira. He is the director of the Center for Epidemic Response and Innovation, CIRI, and the KwaZulu-Natal Research Innovation and Sequencing Platform, CRISP, who both played a leading role in the response to COVID-19 in South Africa through his visionary application of genomics and bioinformatics. He is a professor of bioinformatics at the School for Data Science and Computational Thinking at Stellenbosch University and the College of Health Sciences at the University of KZN. He has worked for over 20 years with viral outbreaks, including HIV, hepatitis B and C, SARS, Zika, and the yellow fever virus. There were others, but I scratched those out because I can't say those. Prof. de Oliveira was also listed in Nature as being one of the top 10 people who helped to shape science in 2021. He was also included in the MIT Technology Review list as one of the leaders of the top 10 breakthrough technologies in 2022. Most recently, he has been the recipient of the Gold Medal Award from the South African Medical Research Council. Please give a warm hand to our last speaker for tonight.
Thank you. So, yeah, the last speaker of the night. And normally, what I'm really famous for, it is for telling bad news, yeah. That's normally what's happened, yeah. I have talked so many bad news to our president, Ramaphosa, that when we had to cancel his agenda and he had to meet with me, he would come and say, "Not you again, Prof. Please," yeah. So, unfortunately, I will start this talk with a lot of bad news for you. So, what we're going to be talking today is how climate change is beginning to fuel an age of epidemics. And how climate change fuels this age of epidemics by two main ways. The first one, by displacing animals, displacing natural animals that would live in the wild, and now they have in close proximity to humans. Yeah. And that's not a joke. For example, all our last 10 big epidemics came from animals that have displaced through environmental damage. We are talking about HIV, we are talking about COVID, we are talking about Ebola, we are talking about Nipah, we are talking about Zika, and we can talk about other viruses and bacteria. The other way that we also damage the environment, and that's begin to create large outbreaks, is by polluting our water stream. Recently we had floods in Durban, and E. coli was completely spread in the sea. As we speak, Malawi, Mozambique, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Swaziland experienced the largest cholera epidemic of the history. Yeah. And not only this climate change will do that, but it also has a big effect on displacing individuals. Individuals that would lose, for example, a harvest and starting to move to towns to live in very bad quality of life, which become perfect for outbreaks. So, and this is even more unfair, because where this is happening is in the global south. That's the global south of the world, which have contributed less than 10% to global warming and pollution. So not only this is happening, it's where you have the extreme events, it's where you have the poverty, where you have the outbreaks, but that who did not contribute it. But one thing, the positive part of that, is that for the past few decades to dealing with these epidemics, we learn. And we learn how to detect them. We learn how to use advanced technologies. We learn how to, when you have a pandemic in the world, South Africa became a shining example on how to quickly detect and characterize pathogens. Yeah? And when this happened, what they did they congratulate us? No, they went and started, let's isolate them. Let's put a travel ban, because then they can stay there and who knows what's happened with them. Yeah? But one thing that the world learned is that pathogens do not respect borders. They don't respect borders, and they move in ways that you may not even imagine. Yeah? As you speak, we have a very pathogenic strain of avian influenza, yeah, that is causing havoc in the bird population in the world. Over 100 million birds have succumbed to this strain of H5N1. It is still extremely adapted to birds, but it can evolve to humans. We have ways, for example, the Zika pandemic in Brazil arrived because Brazil was organizing a Confederation Cup before the World Cup, like South Africa. When a team from the Micronesia, first time that they get in a big international competition, high number of tourists come to Brazil to celebrate, introduce a virus that have the perfect environment, which have killed and destroyed brains of thousands of children in Brazil. Pathogens travel by ship and not with humans. For example, the recent epidemic that you had an outbreaks of chikungunya virus in Italy, it arrived from tires that carry mosquitoes that come from India and cause outbreak there. So they will not respect borders and they will keep moving. Yeah. But another thing that we can do, it is be also using not only these terrible things that happen to the global south. We can use that in our advantage as learning to deal with epidemics, or even learn to do things without energy. So here is a colleague of mine and a friend, Marta Giovanetti, which we took a team with her to the Amazon forest in Brazil to sequence virus in the middle of the forest without electricity. So that's the kind of positive things that load shedding can give to South Africa. You start learning ways of not only as clinicians to identify cases and move and use high technology, but how to take high technology to very remote fields. And that's what we did. So what we decided to do is take that to the next level. And that is to not only this technology, but starting using very advanced data analysis, to try to predict by ecological data where high temperature, where is high water, where these pathogens are like to emerge, where they have the susceptibility. And then also use very advanced data analysis on epidemiology to calculate the risk of importation by linking flight data, by linking like cargo data on where that's likely to happen, when and how. And then these methods that you can sequence and see the evolution of pathogens, of virus, of any organism, that you can do that in hours in place without any energy. So it's Friday this week, Thursday next week, we're gonna launch this big global program called the Climate, which means Climate Amplified Disease and Epidemic. That's a partnership between hundreds of scientists in the world, led by the Global South, led by South Africa, led by Brazil, and led by Australia. Countries that experiment extreme events and starting epidemics. So this program really linking all this, both academics, public health, and industry, to produce the tools to forecast and to be there when the epidemic happens. This program is going to be linked also with the groups of healthcare workers that will follow and will be there to act before the epidemic happens, because to characterize that before an outbreak become epidemic and an epidemic become a pandemic. A very large program that we really hope that can help the world to prevent the next pandemic. But not only that, and we need the help. We have raised dozens of millions of dollars, but we need hundreds, if not billions of dollars from this program. We also need industry with the technology to be there and identify and healthcare workers. And we also need the public to understand that identification of a new pathogen is not bad news. Bad news is not to know what's gonna hit you. Thank you.
Stellenbosch University's Biomedical Research Institute is a world-class, future-focused research complex which is dedicated to understanding the genetic and biomolecular basis of diseases emanating from South Africa and the rest of Africa in the fields of bioinformatics, genomics, anatomy, neurobiology, advanced surgical sciences, biobanking, and more.
The realization of the Biomedical Research Institute resonates with Stellenbosch University's vision of being Africa's leading research-intensive university, with the objective of being globally recognized for our excellence in innovation as we advance knowledge in service of society.
The BMRI is home to the university's Department of Biomedical Sciences, which is made up of over 500 researchers.
At the heart of our scientific endeavours is the challenge to be locally relevant and globally competitive. The appropriate infrastructure to support our researchers and partnering universities and agencies is necessary. Today we are glad to have to launch the BMRI.
Stellenbosch University's Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences academic offerings include 6 undergraduate and nearly 90 postgraduate programs and a host of diploma and short courses across a range of subjects. The faculty is also home to 92 National Research Foundation rated researchers and 7 South African Research Chair Initiative research chairs.
The Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences at Stellenbosch University is situated in Cape Town, South Africa. It's also one of the areas with the highest incidences of not only infectious diseases such as HIV and tuberculosis, but also alarmingly rising levels of non-communicable disease. These major colliding and interacting epidemics put our health systems under severe strain and adversely affect the quality of life. As one of the top faculties for medicine and health sciences on the African continent, we play a key role in providing solutions to these problems through our biomedical research, amongst others.
The BMRI hosts several research groups and centers, including the Rare Disease Genomics Group, TB Host Genetics Groups, the Center for Cardiometabolic Research in Africa, and the Center for Epidemic Response and Innovation. This center is a partner member of the South African mRNA Vaccine Consortium, selected by the World Health Organization to become the first COVID mRNA vaccine technology transfer hub in the world. The 1.2 billion rand investment in the BMRI will allow for the immediate expansion of Stellenbosch University's current research activities, as well as strengthen its existing research and teaching capacity. The BMRI hosts a state-of-the-art, fully automated biorepository, the first of its kind in the Southern Hemisphere, which stores between 3 and 5 million samples at -80 degrees Celsius. The BMRI is also home to a bioinformatics hub, electron microscopy laboratories, proteomics and fax laboratories, a morphology museum, the SunSkill laboratory, a clinical research unit and conference facilities. This facility is one of the country's greenest buildings to have been completed over the past 2 years. The BMRI's energy and water systems all contribute to the university's efforts to meet net zero targets.
The investment in the BMRI will allow significant human capacity development through training of some of the best students from the continent. The BMRI, along with our faculty's large network of collaborators, will be a game changer using breakthrough science to save lives.